All right, that's usually our cue to begin. I just want to start with welcome everybody and doing a little table setting. So we are coming to the end of our conference and starting to head into the breakout sessions that sort of link up to each one of Rural List's pillars. If you are joining this one, it is likely because you are a workforce grantee of LISC or you have interest in being a stakeholder or a partner. So I just want to welcome everybody to the conversation, both new and old. Today, we have two incredible guests with us, and I'm going to let them just come off their mic to say a quick hi. So first, we have Joy Coates with the Markle Foundation and also representing the Rework America Alliance. Hi, Joy.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. And then next, we have Kim Davis with the Walton Family Foundation. Kim, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks. So many of you who joined us for our pre-session for spillover on Monday received a preview of this presentation for Rural Works. We're going to condense it down a little bit to where you're only going to hear me speak for a few moments, and then we're going to pass over to Joy and Kim to talk about how they're elevating this work and how they're investing in rural America and what sort of their vision and theory of changes are in this space. So as many of you know, Rural LISC has a 5-pillar strategy: access to capital, broadband infrastructure, disaster response and resiliency planning, and placemaking inclusive of affordable housing. But today we're going to be talking through what we consider our core pillar for economic development, and that's workforce. We're going to start a little bit with our overview, where we're sort of headed with our model and industrial partnerships, how we're complementing workforce programs, how our programs work together, and then hopefully we're going to end with making a couple of commitments to the rural workforce. So let's just dive right in. We've all been talking a lot about what are the challenges in rural America to workforce development and how we can help solution them. So there was a lot of ideation that happened Monday that came from our communities. Different solutions are sort of percolating. But I think that was one of our intended focuses as we created Rural Works, is we knew that there was innovation and best practices that were happening at the local community level. And what could it truly mean to put you in an explicitly national rural community of practice? So starting that off, we advanced our model, and let me see, I'm having a little tech issue. Here we go. So we started building out the Rural Works model. As you all know, it's been 3 years in the works. We start out with creating coalitions and collaboratives. So Rural Works is really focused on making sure that there are multiple stakeholders at the table who are sort of developing our strategies moving forward. So we spend that first year in more of a discovery phase of figuring out who are the right people to pull up a chair to that table. We recommend that it always has a post-secondary institution, a work-facing organization, and that it be industrial-led. But depending on which rural community you're in, you have different partners. I think about the Mississippi Delta, who pulled in chambers of commerce. For some of you, it was strong workforce investment boards. For others, it was nonprofit social service organizations. It really just depended on who was driving that in your local community. Then we sort of built capacity to align. So creating memorandums of understanding, data share agreements, common terminology and metrics. This year, we're moving into, and this is what we're hoping to launch our grants with next week, developing industry-led career pathways, especially tied to a sector strategy that LISC will be launching this year, and hopefully attaching those to job profiles that pay a livable wage and offer quality benefits to rural job seekers. That last sort of year and what we're moving into next year, and I think Will teased some of this up yesterday if you were with us, is this idea that we want to invest in employer co-impact. So figuring out how they make investments back into your collaboratives and your communities for sustainability, and really helping them sort of size their role within this ecosystem. I know Joy will probably talk a little bit more about that with some of their employer engagement work, but how do they offer not only the finances, but also the training, the coaching, the pre-apprenticeship models, the job shadowing that's going to help job seekers as they navigate along a pathway to livable wage and quality employment. So these are the 7 sectors that LISC is looking to advance over the next 5 years as we're building out our strategy. Several of them are sort of culturally significant to the places that we call home. Some of them are relatively new, but are needed as we look towards a 21st century economy. I know that we spent some time with our collaboratives sort of going through each one of these and what we see as the opportunity and the solutions in each one. Of course, agribusiness is one near and dear to everyone's heart because most of us come from ag-based economies, but likely a transitioning economy into something new. Technology is, of course, going to be that thing that underpins all jobs going forward. Hotel, retail, and accommodation. If there's one thing we know about rural America, it's where people are going to recreate. And it's, of course, going to be a huge driver of the number of jobs that are going to be in our communities. Advanced manufacturing and skilled trades, as we've been uniquely sort of lucky in the reshoring of energy companies and advanced manufacturing as they're coming back to the United States, especially because we offer, available resources, quality labor, and then lower overhead cost. So we really see that being one of the drivers. Energy and renewables is going to be another piece of the puzzle that we think is really going to drive innovation and workforce development over the next 5 years. And then, of course, healthcare. So healthcare is one of those that we're looking through a bunch of different lenses. Is one, we just want to continue to think through quality of place, and we understand where that connects in workforce development, especially with healthcare economies. And then transportation, distribution, and logistics, which, really I think speaks to how rural and urban are interdependent on one another for us to be able to move goods back and forth. So those are our 7 sectors. So when we talk about programming, Rural Works is sort of our model to think through systems level challenges to workforce development, but we also like to think through how we impact clients and job seekers on the ground. We do that largely through financial opportunity centers. These are integrated service models for those of you who are new to them that offer, a wide range of services to include employment, coaching, financial assistance, and income support. And as you can see in bold down here, clients who go through a financial opportunity center are also 50% more likely to land a well-paying job than people receiving employment alone. So we're really trying to make sure that we're funneling people through these sort of systems to think through that retention strategy, but also to really sort of set them up for success. We also have our Bridges to Career, which is a component that we can layer on to financial opportunity centers. It really helps us make that equity reach for those populations who have strong literacy and numeracy issues to sort of skill them up so adult basic education, maybe at the post-secondary level, doesn't become a trap. So that's just some of the efforts we put in there. And these are some of the employment services that can be offered through a bridge component. We, of course, have our new digital navigation program. A lot of rural work sites and a lot of financial opportunity centers saw digital navigation programs sort of overlay. Again, it offered that sort of special assistance to device access, to broadband, but also some of the foundational skills that are really needed in a digital age to perform in a job. Which leads us to an announcement that we're making, and that is a commitment to flex code work. Rural Works is really thinking through the jobs of the future and how does someone in Itabena, Mississippi, or a Tuttle, North Dakota, find quality employment in places like New Orleans, Louisiana, and Los Angeles, California. So we will be making strategic investments with Google and Microsoft to really think through how we deliver that training in a virtual setting, but also how do we attach people to remote jobs. And then small business support networks. So as I always say, rural places still build their economies on Main Street. We often know that large scale industries might not move to our community, and the biggest driver of jobs are going to be small mom and pops. Somewhere around 97% of our jobs originate there. So we're really making those investments into our BDO network, but also these people who are coming out of training to think through how they can build out a sole proprietorship to support themselves if jobs aren't readily available in their community. And this sort of just gives you a quick basic how our programs layer and work together in these integrated service models. So thinking through, the systems level, going through the client level, what are some of the options that we can offer them at Rural LISC through bridges to career? And these are some of the commitments that we're looking to make, I think, this year as we're moving forward in workforce development, is really thinking through an inclusive and empowering workers, especially those who are underrepresented in rural places. So as we often talk, we don't want to stigmatize rural. It is very diverse. We see lots of places where rural intersects with BIPOC in places like the Mississippi Delta, which Kim's going to talk about later in the session. We see it in Colonia with Latinx populations. We see it in First Nations with tribal. So we're really making that commitment to go there and to make those equity reaches in places that have had persistent poverty for over 20 years. Lastly, we're making that commitment back to the workforce systems. So especially those industries who call rural America home. And how do we not only retain you, but how do we attract new businesses to our communities at the same time? So again, if anyone, I know this was sort of a renewed conversation from where we were at Monday, but we just wanted to sort of use it as a table setting conversation as we think through how other partners are sort of layering into Rural Works. And again, we have two people here who have sort of committed to those efforts and how they are planning to support rural America. We're always very appreciative of philanthropy, thinking through equity, but especially rural equity for our communities. So I'm going to take a quick second and I'm going to stop sharing the Prezi, and then we will start to move into conversations with Joy on what Markle Foundation is working on along with the Rework America Alliance. So give me 2 seconds to make that shift. All right, is this up on your screen, Joy?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. So to give a little bit of background, Rural LISC was invited to the Rework America Alliance to just sort of help maybe fill some knowledge gaps in rural America, not only to connect, your communities to them, but for them to be able to really layer in their approach to rural. And we love partners who have that mindset. So we're going to slide it over to Joy and let her talk a little bit through their concepts and where they're going. Joy, feel free to take it over.
All right, thank you so much, Justin. We can go ahead and start with the first slide. I won't do too much on this first piece, but thank you, everybody. We're so glad to be here today on behalf of the WeWork America Alliance. And really, the Rework America Alliance is a nationwide collaboration of employers and nonprofit partners, educators, trainers, and various and sundry corporate partners and employers who have all come together to really make sure that we have a comprehensive strategy for an equitable economic recovery. And we do that, region by region. We'll get into that a little bit later. But what we really want to emphasize is we focus on opening opportunities for millions of unemployed and low-wage workers to move into good jobs, specifically particularly people of color, who have been disproportionately impacted by the current economic crisis. And we do that by identifying promising job pathways for workers to pursue. We identify high-quality training programs aligned to the skills needed for these emerging jobs. We develop digital tools to help our career coaches and others support specialists serve displaced workers. And we directly engage with employers to drive the adoption of inclusive sourcing and hiring practices and develop tools and resources to help them take action every day in their organizations. So one of the greatest strengths of the Alliance is the array of partners that have been brought to the table. As you can see, many of them here, certainly Rural LISC being a key partner. And I know some of our partners have been at the conference today, Google and Microsoft. And we work very closely with Unidos and National Urban League. But our partners really are a part of what makes all of this possible. They are not partners in name. They give us a lot of their time, be it in terms of helping us with facilitating strategy meetings or helping us develop tools that are going to be deployed in the field, and also just the adoption of the skills-based practices that we're going to spend a lot of our time today talking about, and how it really looks in practice and how to get some of their peers, meaning other employers and large corporations, on board with the adoption of these skills-based practices. And so as I said a moment ago, we are focused first and foremost on connecting workers to good jobs with the 4 strategies that we just highlighted a second ago. And you'll hear me repeat similar language that has to do with each of these 4 strategies throughout our time today, because it keeps us grounded and it keeps us in a place where we can constantly ask practitioners direct questions that are related to these areas, so that we know that we're staying proximate to not only the people that we want to serve, but the people who are also serving job seekers, so that we're in a continuous opportunity to build capacity for each other. So what is a skills-based approach? When we talk about a skills-based approach, specifically around hiring, we're talking about 4 phases of how you can change your hiring practices. And with the skills-based approach, you're going to start with a skills-based job posting, and you'll get these slides afterwards. And we're always doing that dance between too much on a slide versus trying to make sure that when we leave it behind, which we want to do, and you share it, which we hope you do, we want you to be able to connect the dots between what we've said and also have a visual to help you understand as we move through the conversation what this is going to look like in practice. So when you write the skills-based job posting, you're going to use skills instead of only experience and education. You're going to distinguish between the required skills and the preferred skills needed for that role. And you're going to reduce bias by using inclusive language. The next phase after that is to conduct a skills-based interview, which means you're going to evaluate your interviewees using the questions that focus on the skills. And you're going to use skills assessments and work assignments to validate each of these candidate skill sets. This ties on to your using your skills-based selection. So now that you've done the work to make sure that you've changed the practice, you've got a skills-based job posting, you're interviewing based on those skills, and now you're going to make the selection by developing a clearly defined skill and selection guidelines so that you can compare your candidate's ability to do the job. You're not thinking about pedigree, you're not looking at where they went to college, you're not looking at the neighborhood they're from, you're not even looking at particularly the specific titles that they've had before. You're looking at the skills they've had before in relation to the skills you need for that role. And we find that this improves inclusivity by using the skills-based assessment you had them do to reduce any kind of compounding bias. Now, the last phase of this is supporting a skills-based onboarding. So once the person has been recruited and interviewed and thankfully hired into these roles, we also want to make sure that the organization has enough in place that this person is going to be retained, because the whole point is to, yes, move you into this good job, but we also want to make sure that you have upward mobility and a viable career path. So we want the employers to be able to use the skills to assess, track, and support the employees' development, to base the promotions on the skills needed for the next role, and to provide transparency on promotion requirements for inclusive development, because we often do hear across industries that it's unclear for how people will move up. Or when we look at leadership teams, or we look at folk who are at a certain level, the higher up we go, unfortunately, the less diversity we see. So we really want to make sure that the skills-based practices are not only in the recruiting, but also working across that whole talent management and retention pipeline, so that once those candidates are in place, they are making the right salary and they have a definitive career path for that upward mobility. We can go ahead to that next slide if it works for us. So all that we've laid out and what we'll continue to discuss today in depth as we get into our work streams, it all fits squarely into our theory of change, which is to uplift the efforts that recognize the skills of job seekers who have generally been untapped, because quite frankly, we haven't had a way to really look at their skills and what they're bringing to the table and help them frame their skills and what they bring to the table. So our aim is to create stronger workforce ecosystems that will uplift the opportunities of vulnerable populations, leveraging the skills-based approach. And we also want to use the tools and resources at our disposal to help fill the gaps in the ecosystem. We know that coaches will need to understand what the skills-based approach is so they can help prepare that job seeker. The employer needs to understand not only skills-based recruiting, but what the skills-based environment looks like. So we want to support and identify with our partners those gaps in the ecosystem and fill them. And we want to support the change management that's going to be needed to adopt these new practices so that we can make sure that job seekers are securing these viable jobs. So what we have in front of us here, and I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest of time, but these are the 6 work streams that really undergird the work of the Alliance and help us from one end of the spectrum to the other, identify what the jobs are and how we get job seekers into these jobs. And it starts with jobs insights. We have employer skills practices, training alignment, coaching support, community activation, and digital solutions. We're actually going to talk for a few minutes about 4 of these where we're spending our most energy right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the job insights one. So the job insights are really the anchor for our work, right? So the job insights is where we understand where are the specific jobs in the areas that we're working in. We're going to outline the high demand for these jobs. And when we say high demand viable jobs, we mean roles that are going to pay more than $42K annually and are going to lead to the next higher paying job on a career pathway. We want to know community by community, and we do this analysis, the job insights team does. And once they have that analysis by community, they provide the community a targeted list of occupations. They direct engagement for skills-based hiring approaches, which means they take these job insights and actually work the worker-serving organizations and the employer partners through those insights to understand how we did our analysis and what it says about their community. And we establish a starting point for how we'll address some of the training gaps in the community, because we have heard from our employers, hey, we have jobs, we have, we're hurting for people to employ, but some of the folks are not quite at the level that we need them to be at. And we've heard that there are training programs in areas, but some of those training programs may not be affordable and or accessible. So we do work on the training team, which we'll get to in a couple slides, to help identify where those gaps are. And so along that same line, the job insights also feeds several tools that support our work, being the job progressions tool, which is a tool for our career coaches to help them have better conversations with their job seekers, and the community insights monitor, which gets even more specific by community. I believe it may be by zip code, but someone will have to fact check me on that one. That was co-developed by our partners at the Atlanta Fed. And so when you receive these slides later on, these tools that I'm talking about will be hyperlinked so that you can take the time that you may want or need to go through them and understand them a little better. But the key piece to point out is all of the insights and the tools that they help fuel, we use those to engage with workforce system leadership, education and training partners, and the business representatives to make sure that we really understand and are able to explain our work to the leaders at the various intersections of that career pipeline so that we can begin to build a bridge for systemic change. Yeah.
I see we have a little bit of animation.
It was a little animation.
I'm one of those people too. I was wondering for a second.
I was like, what's happening? Okay. It was the animation. Thank you to our brilliant design team. They always think about like the look and feel and whatnot. So there we are. The next team that we want to talk about, certainly, and what many of you may be a bit more interested in, is the employer engagement work that we're doing. This work has become huge and exciting because we are able to engage not only employers, but our affiliates. And you've, I know, heard me say affiliates multiple times. I'm going to get to that when we talk about community engagement, because I want to give that conversation its own moment, because a lot of this work would not be possible without our grantee affiliates. But that's a side note. So with our employer engagement practice, we have our own employer engagement team, but also McKinsey & Company, which is one of the partners that you saw on the first slide, has also deployed an entire team to work with us in supporting these localities to offer skills-based training, engage with employer intermediaries, mobilize the employers to take action, and provide continued support to employers. Now, I think that when we talk about mobilizing employers and providing continued support to employers, those have really been some of the key changes that we've been able to see. The employers are actually really willing to work with us and raise their hand and say, we would love to do this. This sounds fantastic. We do see that this would open up many more pathways in our organization, but we're going to need some help in terms of how we actually embed this, because it's not, always top down. It's not bottom up. It can't just be in one isolated part of the organization. So our employer team will work with both large, small, and medium employers, the chambers of commerce, and also never leaving out the unions and the workforce development boards to make sure we are not just waving our flag of, hey, we've got it all figured out, come follow us. We want to make sure that we have the buy-in, the support, and the feedback from these entities that are already on the ground, have been doing this work for decades, especially when we're getting into areas like the chambers of commerce and the unions, because there are just so many nuances pertinent to each community that have to be adhered to. And we actually do welcome feedback from these entities on what we may need to change to make it work in their locality. Next. So you heard us talk about training a minute ago. Now, our training team is one of our emerging streams of work right now. And when we say that, it's because we really consider our work streams to be interconnected and to be really stacked and relate to each other. And as we start to work across the different work streams, that information gets fed back to the other teams to make sure we really are identifying problems and bridging gaps in the ways that we're supposed to. So our training team is now working very closely with our coaching team and our employer team to understand how we are thinking about quality training programs and how we are thinking about where we can, helping to scale programs that we know exist and would fill gaps for these employers and these communities looking to hire, and also where we can perhaps inform or provide some guidance on these training programs that are missing. So if we know there's an organization that we're working with and they say, hey, we're trying to move people more into the medical field, but there are some barriers to these trainings that not all of our job seekers can take part in those trainings. Our training team works closely with them to help figure out what those barriers are. Is it a low literacy program? Is it that some of the job seekers are, from the reentry or justice involved population? And they work to try to figure out, okay, if you've got a large number of folks who are working in reentry population, we actually have found some training programs and corresponding employers that will be friendly to that population and welcoming to them. So you're never setting people up to train for a job that they actually might not be able to get based on things like the fact that they've been justice involved. And then when it comes to the literacy piece, through partners like NAPTU, we have a good feel for where there are training programs that also embed math and literacy support. So that is something that we've heard, from all of our sites that we need to consider, and we're really excited to be able to use direct feedback from folks who are in the field supporting workers and moving the workforce development system forward, to be fortunate enough to get that direct feedback from them to refine the way we do our work in support of them. There's going to be another animation. Now, when we talk about coaching, we are investing a ton of time and energy on our coaching supports right now, because we know that those career coaches are a bit of the linchpin in terms of how do we get an even broader talent pool. And we want to meet our coaches where they are. We don't want to say, hey, what you've been doing for coaching, maybe 10, 20 years is incorrect. We want to work within the context of how folks are currently doing this work, introduce the skills-based practices to them so that they can coach their job seekers in that vein. We were fortunate enough on Monday in one of the pre-sessions, we got to work with some of the FOC coaches and got to really do a deep dive on some of our coaching work, and those slides will be available as well. But what I stress that because that's how we like to do this work. We have training for coaching concepts, and we have discussions and debrief sessions, and we also provide access to different marketing materials that will help the coaches understand and talk about skills-based approaches with their job seekers. So it is all designed to enhance and not replace work that is being done, but to give coaches, to arm coaches with this skills-based approaches. We can go on to the next one. So community activation, and this is where I get to spend a lot of my time, and I'm really thrilled about this particular line of the work. So in the community activation in May, we were fortunate enough to identify our first 5 Alliance affiliates, and they were respectively Goodwill of North Georgia, Goodwill Easter Seals in Minneapolis, Austin Area Urban League, Mikasa Denver, and Pathstone, which is of course part of the Ruralist family out in the Finger Lakes region of New York. And what these folks do is they, as affiliates, are really the nerve center of how we do the community activation piece of the work. All of our sites are really pilot locations that deploy the tools and resources as a strategy for enhancing the service to job seekers. They engage with other organizations within their respective ecosystems and plug us into those organizations so that we can understand from the people who do this work with them every day and will be doing this work with them, after the grant is over and after, we are not as present as we are right now. What are the strategies and the tools that are the most relevant that they will actually see carrying forward into their work? They are also engaged in helping us develop relevant communities of practice. In fact, most of them are engaged now in at least, some conversations around developing a coaching focused community of practice, because all of this work involves not only systems change, but quite frankly, some behavioral changes. And so we want to make sure that we not only have communities of practice where they can learn from each other and hear from each other, but they can help us direct that content in terms of what should really be being discussed in that community of practice. What kind of ideation and brainstorming and problem solving really needs to happen to make sure this work is and remains sustainable. So through that community of practice work, they are able to coordinate various activities and co-develop tools, resources, and content, as well as share their own content, what's already working for them that they know is aligned to the skills-based approach and the mission of the Alliance to help us move that work forward, because we know none of this can happen in a vacuum. And as eager as we are to share our strategies and what's been working, we are even more eager to hear from the field and the folks who do this work every day, what we ought to be considering and what we don't know. Go ahead. And so that brings us to why we're here today and why we're so excited to be here and learn from you and Justin and others and the incredible array of partners that y'all have brought together for this conference. We have had several projects through our Skillful initiative, some out in Colorado and other places where we've had the opportunity to work with rural partners. And through those engagements, we've been able to create, start to create a baseline of knowledge in terms of what rural locations face in terms of challenges and what opportunities exist in rural locations. But we are so thankful that we have partners like Ruralist and in our immediate affiliate of Pathstone to help us figure out, yes, what you've got so far, is definitely there, but here are the other things that you need to consider. Here are the things you need to consider in terms of specific rural localities. Here are the things that you need to consider in terms of what equity agendas look like in the rural context. And this is the invaluable work that we are really excited to continue with and get deeper on in the next year as we think together with you and others that will come to the table with us on this to truly understand how to make the most impact for rural communities. And so that is what I have for you today. It's my contact info. I know we're doing Q&A much later. Justin is still smiling, so it looks like I might have stayed within time. So fantastic.
Oh, it was perfect.
All right.
Yep. And then the one thing I do want to just elevate, and sometimes it's the best part of our job, is we get to play Santa Claus with sites and groups. But we're very appreciative of the resources that Markle and the Rework America Alliance was able to pass down to Pass Stone as we sort of beta test this. And for the Rural Works Network at large, with generous support also from Markle Foundation, we plan to roll out all of these resources and tools to you in 2022. So probably sometime in Q1 or Q2. We're bringing a couple of partners with us, as Kim Davis always says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So we are looking at bringing in the Federal Reserve of Atlanta, Sarah Miller, who also serves on the Rework America Alliance, the Federal Reserve of Richmond, and then the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, to also join us as we push out some of these products to our communities. And I got to tell you, we just finished cross-training our staff on them, and I'm in love with the Skill My Resume. Reagan, I saw your chat point. The things that they have developed for employers to learn that sort of that skills approach, but also hiding it within it is that sort of equity push, which I love. But they hit the employers at that sweet spot of the economic imperative. So it's a really, really fun suite of tools that we're hoping to give to the full network. So thank you again, Joy, and thank you for such a good presentation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, as many of you know, we were supposed to be in the Delta for our in-person conference, and unfortunately, we were not able to do that. But key to the Delta success has been, one family foundation, and that's been it's been Walton Family Foundation. And Kim Davis has been instrumental in driving that work. So we really wanted to invite him on and let him speak more to how their foundation is looking at economic asset building for the region and what they're trying to elevate to the field at large. So Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Justin. And did you happen to get the slides that I sent over, or? Fantastic.
Sure did. Is it on the screen for you?
They are.
Okay, great.
I appreciate it. I want to thank everyone for providing me a little bit of opportunity to talk about the Walton Family Foundation and the work that we have done and what we're thinking about moving forward when it comes to the Arkansas-Mississippi Delta. Some of you may know that the Walton Family Foundation has been involved with this work for decades now. Kind of a little fun fact is the work by Mr. Sam and Miss Helen, founders of Walmart, when it came to their giving, actually started in the Delta before the foundation was officially launched. Mr. Sam and Miss Helen traveled around numerous parts of the South and the Mid-South and looking for a location to launch Walmart. We all know they settled in Northwest Arkansas, Bentonville to be exact. But they did spend some time in very rural communities, and it left a very favorable impression upon them for all the reasons that I think it leaves a favorable impression upon us. And ever since that moment, the Walton family and the Walton Family Foundation has been involved with doing its best to support good work for the folks on the ground in Arkansas and Mississippi and the Delta, to be specific. What I want to share with you today is just a little bit of our journey thus far. We embarked upon what we called a learning year this year, 2021. We started this in January. It came on the heels of our 2020 strategy ending. We do strategy in 5-year increments. So our 2015 to 2020 strategy was coming to an end. We looked at our work that we had done over the last 5 years, and we saw some really outstanding achievements, but we also saw some additional opportunities. And so what we decided to do was spend some time thinking about how we might want to engage the work moving forward. We began to have conversations with numerous people, both grass top leaders as well as grassroots individuals. On the screen here is what you see is just a small sample of the individuals that we've had conversations with. We began to partner with amazing organizations like Rural List to help guide our thinking around the work. Organizations like TNTP to think about our education work. And we are happy to say that we're getting toward the end of that journey. And so what I'm going to show you today is what we think will become our strategy starting in 2022. But once again, it's not an approved strategy at this point. It's just a strategy that the staff will be bringing forward for final approval. Next slide, please. Thank you. One thing that stood out for us as we began to have lots and lots of conversations with stakeholders in various Delta communities is there was this recognition that we at the Walton Family Foundation have a critical role to play. Folks talked about us being a convener and the opportunity to bring folks together. Bringing very disparate parts of the Delta together in order to begin to create the type of learning framework and implementation that will move the entire region forward. We took that very, very seriously. Providing financial resource and access to capital. One of the gentlemen said, you know, the capital that's needed to launch a business or do good work in any other community is what's needed in the Delta. The Delta just needs more of it. And we took that to heart as well. And then finally, we understand that if this work is going to be sustainable, we have to focus on capacity building. How do we support sustainable change through capacity building? How do we begin to provide access, opportunity, and insights to the leaders on the ground that allow them to move their communities forward even long after the Walton Family Foundation is gone, if that were to ever happen? We know it's critical. We like to say those closest to the problems are closest to the solution. So how do we think about community-driven change as we move forward in our next strategy? Next slide, please. The second headline that we got was coalitions can take a number of different approaches. Some of them take a convening or an implementation around a specific sort of entity topic. Others take a more geographic approach. And we realize that we want to participate in all. Geographic approaches when it comes to coalition building is something that we want to go ahead and move forward with, as well as specific identified initiatives. We want to make sure that we're working toward as well. One thing we heard loud and clear in our work is that this work moves at the speed of trust. And the ability to build trust by participating in coalitions and working with the folks on the ground to create the type of framework that moves them forward is going to be very critical for us to have not only continued success, but expound upon the successes that we've had in our past strategies. Next slide, please. And then we also heard the idea that education and youth engagement is critically important and it cannot be ignored. We know that when we started looking at some of the numbers in regards to the Delta region and certain communities in the Delta versus broader communities nationwide, that there's a lot of work to do in the education space. And so we wanna really focus on that. We wanna figure that out. Those of you who know the Walton Family Foundation, you understand that we have a certain expertise in this space. And we think that all of those experts should be bared when it comes to the work in the Delta. And so we will be working critically hard, not only internally, but with our external partners to think about education and youth engagement when it comes to the Delta. Next, please. I wanted to bring you inside a little bit of our thinking when it comes to our mission. And you can see our Delta mission, our Delta vision ties very nicely with our organizational mission to honor the Walton family's shared values and commitment to communities in what we call the home region, and the Delta is a part of the home region, by creating opportunity and enhancing quality for all. There are a couple things in the Delta vision I want to bring to your attention when we think about this work. First of all, driven by leadership of local organizations. Once again, those closest to the solution are closest to the problem, or those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And we want to make sure that we're having conversations with those folks on the ground, working day to day to change or enhance their community. We want to make sure that there are equitable opportunities and access. When we start looking at the data behind the wealth gap in places like the Delta, we know that there's a lot of work to do. And so we want to bring to bear resources to build wealth, to learn, for people to grow in their community. We want to do our best to make sure that we can demonstrate to those in the community, as well as those who may be returning to the community, that they can accomplish those dreams that they had for themselves very early on in these communities with just a little support. Next, please. So here's where we landed. We landed at looking at doing our work and the next strategy in 3 different communities. One, Helena, West Helena on the Mississippi side, Clarksdale, Mississippi. Helena, West Helena on the Arkansas side, Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Pine Bluff would be a new geography for us. When we started to dig into this idea around coalition work and coalition building, there's some really amazing things happening in Pine Bluff. And we knew that we wanted to not only get close to it and try to support it, but we think that there's an opportunity to learn and grow and share that with the other 2 communities, Helena, West Helena, and Clarksdale. We landed on 3 initiatives. I mentioned one earlier, education and youth engagement. Education was something, in all honesty, regardless of the conversation and regardless of the topic, that leaders and those on the ground came back to over and over and over again in these communities. And so it's just something we felt like we can't ignore. Economic asset building, and this is where our friends at Rural LISC really helped us out. In all honesty, this is a new endeavor for us, the economic asset building work. But once again, it was something we felt like we couldn't ignore. When we start thinking about home ownership and the disparities in home ownership, when we start thinking about the wealth gap and the disparities in the wealth gap, it was something we recognized. If we had the opportunity to be involved with, learn, add leverage, we wanted to do so to ensure that there is equitable communities, equitable actions happening in these communities. And then finally, we think about the work through a coalition and capacity building space. I can tell you, the Walton Family Foundation hasn't been known to do a lot of coalition work. But it's something that we've come around to, and we recognize that in order to bring more attention to some of the opportunities in the Delta, we need to build real strong coalitions, and that's what we intend to do. Next slide. In our education and youth engagement work, and I'm going to go through these rather quickly here. In our education and youth engagement work, we've landed on a couple of strategies. Once again, this is all tentative. This is all draft language, but we think this is where we're going to end up. One, educator workforce. When we start looking at the quality of educators in these communities, we recognize that there's some opportunity for us to help them develop and grow. College and career pathways, ensuring that students either have an on-ramp onto college or an on-ramp into a career, and then educational options outside of school, as well as with some of our public charter work. Next, please. Economic asset building. I've mentioned already the idea of individual and family asset savings. How do we help families hold on to more of the assets that they have accumulated or they are accumulating? over time, whether that looks like land ownership for Black farmers, whether that looks like home ownership. Those things are really critical when we start talking about building assets. Workforce and small business, we want to make sure that we're growing and strengthening partnerships between industry and post-secondary serving organizations to ensure that folks have the opportunity to really do what they would like to do in regards to their careers, and making sure that we are working really hard to make that happen. I really, the workforce and small business strategy, it actually complements what we saw with the college and career pathways by picking up where the K-12 graduation support sort of left off. So it moves into obviously that adulthood with sector-specific workforce development. So this strategy really seeks to support small business and resiliency and growth through access to capital, technical assistance, focus on financial strength and sustainability. In order to attract and sustain businesses and spur employment in the region, it's essential that local residents have relevant job skills and training. And this is where our friends at Rural LISC really came and helped us out. So currently the workforce system in the Delta, we know is under-resourced by both public and private funders. It leads to a disjointed and programmatic gaps in serving low to moderate income job seekers. Additionally, for the local economy to thrive, it's critical that small businesses in the Delta are financially resilient. Justin mentioned those numbers and in regards to the Delta, the number of businesses that are small businesses. And in Arkansas and Mississippi, it's higher than the number that he mentioned. It's about 99% of businesses are considered small. And so in the areas, in the communities in which we work, we will be working hand in hand with small businesses, ensuring that they receive access to capital for their growth. But we also want to make sure that we are working hard to make sure that they have the type of workforce that they need and moving forward. Next slide, please. And then finally, I've mentioned how we plan on doing this work through the coalition and capacity building. And we invite you all after this conference to reach out and let's have some conversation about how we can partner around some of this work in those communities I mentioned. Next slide. This is our thinking, in all honesty, over the last several years and where we hope to end up. You can see if you were to go back 5 to 7 years ago, we actually operated in a very independent way, project by project. And we've gotten some great results for some families and students, as well as some communities. But we realized that if we can really leverage our convening power, our collaboration power, that we become not only an organization that promotes amazing projects, but an organization that becomes a catalyst. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to partner around the coalition building to become catalysts in these areas, particularly when it comes to workforce and small business. Next slide. All of what you've seen today is research and learning driven. We have a learning agenda that I can share, and I'll share just a little bit about that in a couple minutes here. We always want to create a feedback loop for community. We've done that through a number of different ways. Our most exciting opportunity in regards to direct feedback, in all honesty, is we've hired someone to be our eyes, ears, and boots on the ground in the Arkansas, Mississippi Delta. And we are looking forward to his work in the Delta, rolling up to informing our strategy as we move through the next several years. Next slide, please. So here's what the framework looks like. I've kind of gone through this. We have the education and youth engagement as an initiative, the economic asset building, and the coalition and capacity building. This has been created over during our last 9 to 10 months or so with a number of individuals who have provided their expertise and their guidance. And I'm going to end here, but want to take the opportunity for you to join us, the Walton Family Foundation, as we work in the communities. And I've given you a little small insight into how we're thinking about the work moving forward. With that, yeah, I'm going to stop there, Justin, if you don't mind, and I'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions.
Great, thanks. So how about we start with one for Joy? Joy, how about, can you maybe elevate to the group, because it seems like there's a couple of questions, especially around resources. Can you tell them a little bit more about what are the suite of resources to both work-facing organizations and employers, and maybe where they can find those?
So we have two separate threads. So for worker facing organizations, we have a lot of like coaching tools. So those are the virtual career coach training. And I think I should be able to, if I can pull it off my desktop, I can pop the link in the chat, but everything is available online. We'll start there. With our coaching training tools, you do need a code for those, but you can just go to the website and which I'll put in the chat later on, and you can request a code for those. So the virtual coaching is a whole suite training series that goes over skills-based practices, the skills-based approach to coaching, how to help the job seekers prepare for interviewing and the like. It's a multi-course suite. And coming up this fall, there are two new modules that are being introduced, one on human-centered coaching so that we can get at some more of the basic needs and mental health type conversations that job seekers are facing. And then also a new module that's focused solely on racial equity practices and skills-based coaching. And that gets at, a lot of the questions that we have not asked while we are focused certainly on removing bias. Certainly it does still exist, and we do still need strategies to better combat it, both on the coach side and on the job seeker side. For the employers, we have the Skillful Talent series that takes all of the employers through what skills-based practices look like in terms of how you should create a skills-based job posting. How do you do a skills-based interview? How do you make the selection based on the skills-based interview and assessments that you've already conducted? And then the onboarding and retention aspects of skills-based hiring practices. Those are also available on the Markle and Skillful websites. And if I can find that link, I'll send it. If not, I will get it to Emily so that she can get it to everyone, Justin, if that'll work. But
Totally fine.
But you can access all of that online. We also have several tear sheets and what have you that we can forward on to folks so that that could be made available as well.
Sure. Thanks, Joy.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, in your presentation, you had talked a lot about sort of this, I would say, adding on of economic asset building and then the coalition building. What is Walton Family Foundation really hoping to elevate to the field at large around workforce development and small business supports and just assets?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, I think we see an opportunity for more conversation in regards to workforce development in rural communities. We feel as if there is something that has existed in a smaller select group of folks and having those conversations, but we hope to be able to bring that to a broader conversation and what those challenges might look like, right? So for example, we all know that the federal government, there is unprecedented dollars that communities will be allowed to apply for. We know that there are certain challenges when it comes to our rural communities that folks don't always, they're not always aware of. And so we hope to, through our work, begin to gather those and highlight those and hopefully move towards some change. Here's a perfect example. We've had a conversation, and you know this, Justin, in certain parts of the Delta, flooding is unfortunate. And it seems to happen far too often. And there are individuals who lose their primary asset, their home. It seems like more and more these days. Long story short, because there isn't the type of population density in the Delta, those communities don't always qualify for federal dollars to assist those folks in those communities. And so what you have is you have this inequity happening where when you look at places like New Orleans, my hometown, right? Or if you look at a Houston, or, you know, pick the place that has had some sort of natural disaster here recently with a certain amount of density. There are tremendous dollars that are flowing to those communities while our rural brothers and sisters are left out. And so we think that there's an opportunity for us to use our unique voice to talk about some of those inequities. We also think that there's an opportunity for us to highlight where the system appears to be disjointed. And we think that there's an opportunity because of the smallness of place and the connection of individuals and communities to hopefully move towards solutions faster. Now, I know, once again, I am not naive, and we are not naive. This work moves at the pace of trust. And so we need to make sure that we're building the type of trust that can bring individuals together. We can identify where the system isn't aligned, and then have some real strong conversations about how to get those things aligned. I had lunch yesterday, for example, with an individual who works on these issues that reports directly to the governor of Arkansas. And he talked about how there is an alignment throughout the entire system, and how he's thinking about helping to align the system. And my words to him were, you know, we'd like to start to do those things in rural communities, particularly in the Delta, sooner rather than later. So those are the things I think we can bring to the table. But I'll be honest with you, we need to keep learning from folks like yourself, from folks like Rural Lisk, from Joy and others on this call. We are not naive to think that we have the answers. We understand the role that we can play, but we want others to influence that role by having conversations in partnership with us.
Well, I know I still have several questions, but I don't want to take up all the room in the room. How about we go to any of our community partners? Does anyone have a question or a thought they wanted to elevate after hearing Kim and Joy? All right, well, I know I still have a couple, and feel free to chime in if something comes to mind. So Kim, the other thing I thought was interesting is this investment in the creation of the Delta Philanthropic Forum. So most of the sites that are here today are in rural places. We know that all rural places are drastically under-resourced by not only the federal government, but also by private philanthropy. The Mississippi Delta being the most under-resourced at just $41 per person in philanthropic investments. So can you talk a little bit more around the strategy there, and what could be maybe the potential for someone in this group to work with a local community foundation to figure out how do we get other funders aggregated at a national level to invest in us regionally, as opposed to this always like, you know, we don't want to just keep cutting off a little piece of the pie. We want someone to add to the pie. And it seems like Walton's really starting to think through strategies there of how do we attract more dollars to the Delta, so it's not just investment after investment of Walton family funding or Kellogg family funding. You know, it's really thinking through a broader concept there.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Justin, what our work over the last several years has led us to understand is that, you know, this has to be community driven. When the community owns the work, there is a certain sustainability that we've seen, versus when an organization like ours, which we don't really do, we don't own programming, but when other organizations come in and try to implement programs to communities, we recognize that those don't tend to last. And the outcomes that they might have seen in other communities, they may not see in the Delta, right? And so our first key point is that we recognize that we have to be working with the community. Now, in doing that, we recognize that there are opportunities for those of us in the funding space to create the type of relationship that we begin to build upon each other's work and we come to the table together. So you mentioned, and I'm glad you did, the Delta Philanthropy Forum, right? It's a relatively new group of funders that have come together that have interest or have been investing in the Delta for some time. And the Delta broadly, not the Delta in the areas I mentioned that the Walton Family Foundation is interested in. And there's this recognition that although we have all been doing some investing, we have not been speaking to each other in ways that will maximize the opportunities there. And in all honesty, most of those organizations don't have someone on the ground. And so, I might go in for, a couple of weeks and then leave, and then someone else might come in a couple of days later, but there wasn't this connection that was happening in order to talk about the work. Now, we were very aware that our organizations would, we were all doing work, because when we spoke to grantees, we would hear grantees say, yeah, Kellogg has just funded something along those lines. So we started looking across the country, and we realized that these funder networks exist, particularly in some really important rural communities. The Appalachian Funders Network is in existence. The Texas has a Texas Rural Funders Network. And we thought, you know what, we're committed to the Delta. It's time that we launch what we're calling the Delta Philanthropy Forum. And so a group of funders have come together. We're having conversations about what that organization might look like. And the important piece to that, I think it provides an opportunity for other philanthropic organizations or other funders who are interested in the Delta. It provides them a place to go, an additional place to go. The community foundations exist, but if they wanted to look at something more broadly, that's not necessarily bound by geography in a lot of ways, you have this organization where you have peer-to-peer networks. You have individuals that have done this work, not only in the Delta, but can draw upon their larger work nationally. And it provides a connection piece for us all. And so that's how our thinking began to evolve. And we started to realize the power of coalitions and the importance of coalitions, because it's one thing for, Kim Davis to do some work and give a call to Justin and say, hey, Justin, I'm thinking about this. What are you thinking about? It's another thing for Justin and Kim and Joy and Angela and Leslie and everyone here to kind of come together and begin to think around that work collectively, understanding that there will be things that I would be interested in that may not land with the group. And there are things that the group may be interested in that may not land with me, right? And so that's the part of the coalition building space, but building that trust I talked about to move the entire region forward.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Well, again, everyone, I know we are rubbing right up against time, so please join me in thanking Kim Davis with Walton Family Foundation and Joy Coach with Markle Foundation one more time. And it was great to have you all join in. I believe we have one more just closeout session immediately after this one, where Kim, as we say in the Delta, is going to take us home. And we're going to get a quick video from some incredible work and some incredible partners in the Mississippi Delta. So hang in there just a little bit longer in this virtual conference, and we'll be closing it down shortly. But again, appreciate everyone. This will stay up on the site, so it was recorded. Please feel free to access it, or if you would like Kim or Joy's presentations along with the rural list launch strategy of sectors, we will be posting those to the site as well, so they will be publicly available. If there's anything else, I think you all have my email, or you know how to get a hold of me. But thank you again to our speakers and to our incredible guests.